So let's jump right in. User democracy. I'm just going to quickly say by way of introduction that this is a concept that I'm trying to still establish or sort of, explore for myself in my dissertation. So it's not something, it's something rather new. So I hope you bear with me with, and I do quite a bit of setting up in the beginning in order to give sort of a backdrop of where the concept to me sort of emerges. Okay. Contemporary debates about the political impact of digital platforms in the West often revolve around a central limiting dichotomy. Does the rise of digital media revitalize or hurt democracy? This project is partly built on the argument that the answer is both and. Digital platforms can both allow for anti-hegemonic moments of the political to emerge, as well as offer unprecedented possibilities for institutional political engagement and ad hoc collective organizing and protest, and also be an anti-democratic force for fostering hate, control, oppression, and misinformation. They can do so, but this is not a foregone conclusion. Put differently, as much as platforms are not perfectly automated machines for manipulation and spreading hate, neither are they liberatory and free spaces for collective organizing and expression. There's much room for failure, misuse, updates, and evolutions, and the larger societal context to play a role. Against a deterministic or technocratic approach, closing itself off to the possibility of being surprised, the both and can serve as a reminder of the constitutive void at the heart of community, an opening for the political to erupt when and where it is least expected. Beyond this dichotomy of platforms helping or hindering various foundational aspects of democracy, however, lies another crucial and somewhat understudied aspect that is the focus of this project. Digital platforms promote and engender their own normative conceptualization of democracy and proper political conduct. This includes defining what is in the public interest, what constitutes quote unquote healthy public discourse and popular will formation, as well as what possibilities for collective organizing and desirable citizenship practices are supposed to look like. Platforms also hold outsized governing power over the terms and limits of digital public life and thus the shape of our common world, the in-between that enables politics, as Hannah Arendt puts it, by defining its condition of possibility for code, categorization, curation, and distribution. Crucially, digital platforms therefore not only hold powers as facilitators of both democratic and anti-democratic tendencies, but control the very ground upon which these trends take place. Without oversight that would require justification of their reasoning, these corporations can, for example, classify and remove misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic, even if this content is shared by an elected president, as much as they can deprioritize #Ferguson from their trending topic sections in the wake of the murder of unarmed Black teenager Michael Brown by police. Through ranking, filtering, or editing interventions, platforms hold substantial structuring power over modes of public appearance, enforcing particular kinds of political architecture and temporal rhythms that discipline how something or someone can enter the collective perceptual field or not. On these platforms, quote, code as law is code as police, as Wendy Chun puts it. Prevailing discourse around technology and democracy has kind of accepted that the very ground of civic life in the digital era has become a service offered and controlled by private interests, something outside of collective intervention, provided for subjects to be used, but not radically reassembled by them. In contrast to, for example, the policing and violent breaking up of demonstrations on a public street, this kind of governing power tends to leave little trace of a struggle. Indeed, users are often unaware it is happening at all or how it works. What larger conceptions of politics are at stake when a few major tech corporations hold such immense power over crucial infrastructures for collective world making, building, maintaining, and policing digital public space, and structuring the creation of shared information landscapes according to obfuscated logics? What is at stake when politically meaningful moments of conflict or dissensus, moments that, quote, reveal the difference of a society to itself, as political philosopher Rancière puts it, are only selectively allowed to appear? Their automated invisibilization, leaving barely a trace, to help reconstruct the forced neutralization of a struggle. Highlighting various forms of platform power, especially in response to tech corporations describing themselves as quote-unquote mere facilitators or neutral and open to everyone, has at this point become a well-established project in research on digital media. More recently, however, platforms are arguably starting to back away from such an assertion of neutrality and are acknowledging their governing role more explicitly through a variety of initiatives. These range from educational programs like Google's Digital Safety and Citizenship curriculum or Facebook's Digital Literacy Library to proactive, coordinated, and publicized bans and suspensions, for example, of accounts linked to the US Capitol insurrection in January 21, including, again, that of the elected US president, or those linked to QAnon or COVID-19 conspiracies. The corporations have also publicized their various forms of interested editing interventions, like Instagram hiding likes to users in the name of better mental health, or various platforms introducing misleading information labels to appear next to questionable content. Or else interventionist filtering, like Facebook altogether reducing content labeled political in users' news feeds. The old excuse of being mere facilitators, supporters, and hosts of user-generated content, while eschewing associations with, quote, the role of gatekeeper, even curators, end quote, baked right into the term platform itself, as Tarleton Gillespie argues, has long started to sound hollow. Especially to avoid government regulation and in the name of corporate social responsibility, platforms are now more openly, publicly, and proactively renegotiating how to manage the populations that dwell in their digital gathering spaces responsibly as well as profitably. Given this backdrop, one question I want to explore is what kinds of political imaginaries emerge from this trend of tech corporations more openly taking quote unquote responsibility towards political systems and public life. I want to propose that in response to this trend, democracy, the governing ideal social media platforms originating in the West purport to protect and support, is constructed in platform discourse as a pedagogical and technological problem that needs to be solved. Not out of existence, but to become optimized as a more knowable, delineated, and manageable process. This has material effects on how digital public life is structured, lived, and disciplined, how shared realities can take shape online and off, and which categories and practices become seen as especially politically meaningful. One of the most recent examples of this trend is the decision by Facebook to altogether reduce content labeled political in users' news feeds, and instead show their users more posts by friends and family. Not that this is actually possible. How does one predefine and categorize what might emerge as politically meaningful? How does one regulate ahead of time the myriad ways people find to communicate to each other about things of communal importance? Despite this impossibility, Facebook's move highlights how political content is being imagined and treated as a delineated, identifiable category. This category is then established as a problem in need of technological management, like filtering it out of certain contexts in order to ostensibly create a more neutral zone of familial closeness and intimacy, always taken for granted as pre or extra political. To put it in the language of the tech corporation, the user's information experience and possibilities for interaction are being fine-tuned in response to the feedback repeated by Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg that, quote, people don't want politics and fighting to take over their experience on our services, end quote. How much politics is too much? What is the most satisfactory way to experience politics? These concerns themselves betray a certain orientation towards the political, that it is a technologically identifiable and measurable part of an experience that can be balanced out against other concerns, and in this way be brought in line with creating a satisfying service environment in the name of improving their service for the user, as well as taking responsibility towards the political field. Tech corporations like Facebook are treating the digital public life they oversee like a problem of calibration. Both a politics of definitions and categorization and an intervention into lived experience are at stake here, as societal interactions are staged as a programming problem. Not all politics is created equal, according to Facebook, however. Posts from, quote, authoritative health organizations like the CDC and WHO, as well as national and regional health agencies, and content from official government agencies and services will be exempt, end quote, from this reduction of political content in the name of the user. To point this out is not to say that health information is not crucially important, of course, but to show who has the power to confer the label of, quote unquote, authoritative information source, as much as the label of gratuitous political fighting, as part of what has been called, and I think the link to health here makes this especially explicit, a kind of communication biopower. Who gets to decide what kinds of political content are an imposition on the self and the community, overwhelming and cumbersome, and in need of authoritative recalibration? As Tiziana Terranova argues, such communication biopower is partly exercised through the, quote, propagation of intensities or affects, a battlefield for the war staged on the terrain of perception, end quote. In the example of Facebook limiting political content to favor posts by family and friends, this is reflected in the aspiration of exposing the user to just the right level of potentially frustrating political fighting. In other words, the proper intensity of political affect, while allowing them to remain informed enough on matters pertaining to their, arguably very limited citizenship responsibilities, like keeping up to date with public health guidance and governmental public service announcements. Deciding which content will be deprioritized and thus perceived less in one's newsfeed, and which is still allowed to appear prominently to all users as being in the general public interest, is a way of managing the terrain of perception on the level of the population, always a potential battleground in need of taming in order to become more predictable. As John Cheney Lippold writes about the soft biopower of algorithms, to decide on questions like these means having significant control over the, quote, relationship that categories have to populations, and most importantly, what categories actually come to mean and be redefined as, end quote. One of these categories is democracy and its attending spaces, practices, and EFI, instituting certain understandings of how to exercise popular sovereignty, engage in general will formation, or collectively agitate against existing power structures, always potentially destabilizing and largely unpredictable event. On the level of both the individual and the population, what kind of political imaginaries does such categorization, ranking, calibration, and perception and affect management give rise to? What does it mean to imagine democracy, including its practices and infrastructures of assembly and discourse, as a technological problem to be solved in the name of smooth operability, better design, user-friendliness, or optimization? It is this ideologically inflective discursive field that I will call the political imaginary of user democracy. Political imaginary of user democracy is informed by a technocratic understanding of politics, including the valorization of data and automation, predictability, and systemization. Community and popular sovereignty are here imagined as operational and thus potentially programmable, which devalues the need for political contestation inherent in questions of histories, justice, and equality to play out in a truly public setting. Instead, digital public life is facilitated for subjects through the service of interface design, algorithmic filters, or user manuals. Under this framework, democracy is seen as a project of optimization and management, not common struggle. Such optimization is supposed to come about through better designed user experiences or balancing out incentives like profit and the public good better, de-emphasizing the possibility that more radical reconceptualizations of publicness, collective intervention, or common worlds and futures are needed, which are carried out and struggled over by subjects themselves. As previously mentioned, this imaginary is rooted in politics more broadly, and democracy in particular, becoming seen as a pedagogical and technological problem. At the heart of user democracy is the ideology of technocratic solutionism, defined by D.M. Fox as the insistence by experts that, quote, problems have technical solutions, even if they are the result of conflicts about ideas, values, and interests, end quote. In the discourse of user democracy, these technical solutions exceed digital technologies themselves, however, and also include techniques for behavior modification, pedagogical training, and user manual guidance. This is part of why I call user democracy a political imaginary and not a socio-technical one, as has become popular in the literature and digital media in recent years. What is at stake here are not exclusively technological projects, so this is clearly a prominent aspect, but also offline conceptions of political self, community, practice, and institutions. User democracy technologizes even that which eludes the grasp of technology. The orientation inherent in use as a practice might stem from technological interfaces, for example, but can also travel and shape how one approaches public service, bureaucracy, school, even when digital technology is not immediately involved. It is a form of subjectification rooted in human technological interaction, but not exclusive to it. What is ultimately at stake in such a critical reading of the changing conceptions of democracy under digital communicative capitalism is not a simple condemnation, counting the various ways that corporations may influence political subject formation and the larger field of the political. While such reminders and analyses are much needed, I engage with the question of how digital platforms, especially as spaces for public appearance, are understood and governed, in order to show how they're an integral part of shared political struggles and thus deserving of our collective intervention. Defining the limits and categories of our common world should not be outsourced to largely unaccountable interests. This work is a shared responsibility with which all of us are tasked. To engage in this work, we need to continue fighting for decommodified and just public spaces where we can debate, clash, and act in concert together. What is ultimately at stake is to keep up this fight for alternative spaces and futures that are organized according to radically different imaginaries than those of the technologically facilitated politics of digital consumer capitalism, like user democracy. Thank you.